number 10 is Anne Frank's attic. For those of you who don't know, Anne Frank was a German-born Jewish girl who kept a diary in which she documented life in hiding from 1942 to 1944 during the German occupation of the Netherlands in World War II. She wrote every day in her diary about her life from her family's hiding place in an Amsterdam attic. Her diary was eventually published, and it's now one of the world's best-known books. Now, this photo is not of Anne, but of her father, Otto, in 1960, revisiting the attic where the family hid. He was the sole survivor of his family, so I can't imagine the pain he had revisiting this place. Later, the photographer Arnold Newman recalled taking this photo. He said, "The mood was depressing, and I immediately began photographing him. After a few moments, the Westertoren bells next door began to ring. Those were the bells that Anne wrote about. He suddenly broke down completely, weeping uncontrollably, and then so did I. We never met again. To this day, when I lecture or tell his story to people, I find I choke up. I still can't help myself." Number 9. An inmate at the Rab camp. The Rab camp was one of several Italian concentration camps, and it was established during World War II in July 1942 on the Italian-occupied island of Rab, now in Croatia. Estimates of the Commission for Determining the Crimes of the Occupiers say 4,641 detainees died at the camp, including 800 inmates who died while being transported from Rab to other concentration camps in Italy. In July 1943, after the fall of the fascist regime in Italy, the camp was closed, but some of the remaining Jewish prisoners were deported by German forces to the extermination camps. Under Italian Army Commander Mario Rotatta's watch, the ethnic cleansing and violence committed against the Slovene civilian population included summary executions, hostage-taking and ending the hostages' lives, reprisals, and the burning of houses and villages. Slovenes and Croatians suffered from cold and hunger in open-air tents, surrounded by barbed wire fence and guarded towers. At its peak, there were up to 15,000 internees. Conditions at the camp were described as appalling, filthy, muddy, overcrowded, and swarming with insects. This photo just shows how much suffering they went through. Number 8. A jail cell from the Salem witch trials. This makeshift jail cell truly brings out the horrors of the Salem witch trials. These trials were a series of hearings and prosecutions of people accused of witchcraft in colonial Massachusetts between February 1692 and May 1693. More than 200 people were accused, 30 people were found guilty, 19 of whom were executed by hanging. Now, women vastly outnumbered men in the ranks of accused and executed. It was in cells like this one that the accused witches spent their final moments before being executed. Now, it's just sad because we all know that this was just a scare and that they weren't real witches. Many of these women were suspected and chosen because they were simply unliked. Number 7. Pyramids on the Moon. In 1972, this image was taken by Apollo 17 during its flight to the moon near an area known as Geophone Rock. NASA listed the image as blank, but after retouching the photo, you can see that it's not completely blank. Turning up the contrast, a pyramidal structure can be seen. So, what is it? Was it some malfunction of the camera, or is there actually a pyramid on the moon? NASA has never given a credible version of the issue, which has led to some speculations about what actually can be on the moon, hidden from the public. And listen, not to be a crazy conspiracy theorist, but maybe it is true that aliens built the pyramids on Earth as they look like they did it on the moon too. I don't know, but it gives you a lot to think about.
Coming in at number 6, former Sansi UFO houses. When construction on these peculiar houses began in 1978, they were marketed to be vacation resorts for US military officers coming from their East Asian postings. But as you might have noticed, they have an extremely futuristic look to them, hence why they got the nickname UFO houses. However, the bubbly pod-like architecture wasn't the only strange thing about these houses. A mere 2 years after construction began, the project was abandoned and never finished due to several car accidents and a number of construction workers who took their own lives on the job. This, of course, caused a huge loss on the investment, and they were forced to end the project. The plan from there was to tear down all the buildings despite a major public pushback, and eventually in 2010 all the UFO houses were demolished. But of course, this still didn't answer the mystery on everyone's mind. What was behind all this tragedy, and why were they so hell-bent on destroying the buildings? Well, there are a few theories. Some believe that the site was the formal burial ground for Dutch soldiers and that the workers had been cursed during construction, while another theory claims that the tragedies were due to the bisecting of the Chinese dragon sculpture located near the resort gates. And of course, the shape of the buildings drew in conspiracy theorists who claim aliens were the reason for death and that they could have threatened the company to tear it down. So considering the buildings no longer exist, they could have very well been something they tried to keep from us. Coming in at number 5, Vaz Island. Way back in the 1920s, the Red Army began searching for a discreet place to build a military complex for inventing, producing, and testing biological weapons. They wanted something small and far away from the Soviet borders so as not to draw attention. And eventually by 1948, such a place was found. Almost immediately, a top-secret Soviet lab began testing agents such as smallpox, anthrax, and plague, among others. However, what they didn't see coming was that the island, once split between Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, would begin to grow in size once the Aral Sea began drying up in the 1960s. Then fast forward to 1971, and a weaponized smallpox was accidentally released from the lab, infecting 10 people, 3 of whom lost their life. And by the 1990s, the secrecy of the lab got compromised. All island inhabitants were evacuated, leaving the base completely abandoned by 1991. However, in their haste to leave, many of the containers were not properly destroyed or sealed. And so over time, these containers began to leak, contaminating the grounds for decades. Now, the good news is that by 2002, a lot of the sites were decontaminated, but many areas remain contaminated, and it's still one of the most feared and deadly places in the world. Coming in at number 4, underwater pyramids. Located in the Bahamas, this photo found in Google Maps has left many thinking that they discovered underwater pyramids. Now, I know, this is a full conspiracy theory, but I mean, what else do you expect to find when Google Maps has blurred out seemingly normal places across the globe? The main conspiracy surrounding these alleged underwater pyramids is that they are living proof of the long-lost city of Atlantis, or at the very least, proof of some ancient Aztec civilization. But of course, there are others out there who claim these underwater pyramids all have to do with aliens. The mysterious structure is estimated to measure between 3.5 to 11 miles across, based on the photos, although no one knows for sure, as you can't get to the structure to see for yourself. If it is in fact a pyramid, and the size that many believe it to be, it would be the biggest pyramid ever built. But seeing as though no one can visit them, it might be a long while before we know if these pyramids prove any kind of extraterrestrial involvement on Earth. Coming in at number 3, Amchitka Island. Once home to the Aleut people for over 2,500 years, Amchitka Island has had no permanent population since 1832. In 1836, when the United States purchased Alaska, they gained control of the territory, and it's likely that this purchase had a lot to do with the declining population. However, that's not why it's blurred from the public view. Beginning in the 50s and up until the 70s, Amchitka was used by the US Atomic Energy Commission as a site for underground nuclear detonations, and during these 20 or so years, this island became known as the location of one of the largest underground tests ever conducted in US history. At the time, quite a bit of controversy followed what was going on at the island, mostly due to the fear that the tests could cause several environmental impacts and desolate the land, which frankly, they were not wrong about. While not entirely confirmed, it is the general belief that the controversial nuclear past of this island is the reason behind the ominous blur, as it's not somewhere Google is quick to advertise as a place to visit. Coming in at number 2, Grom headquarters. If you have ever Googled Warsaw, Poland, you may or may not have come across a strange group of buildings that look like mysterious blobs compared to the rest of the city around it. Well, as it turns out this is no accident. Those buildings are GROM headquarters, which is essentially Poland's Special Forces building. Now, I'll be honest, there is not much you can find about these headquarters. All I can find out about this top secret group is that they rescued CIA agents from a mission gone wrong in Desert Storm back in 1991. And apparently, whatever else it is they are up to, they do not want you to know about. Which, I mean, I guess is kind of the point. So as much as I'm sure many of us would like to know what goes on in this super secret Polish spy headquarters, I'm afraid that information is highly classified and their exact location will continue to remain a secret from the public. And last up in our #1 spot, 2207 Seymour Avenue. Once the home of the beyond evil Ariel Castro, there is no conspiracy that comes with why this house is blurred on Google Maps, only a truly terrifying reality. The horrors in this house began in the mid-90s when Ariel was married to a woman named Grimilda Figueira. Ariel was extremely abusive towards his wife, but despite cracking her skull and causing an eventual terminal brain tumor from his actions, the domestic violence arrest did not result in an indictment. By the late 90s, things began to get even scarier for Grimilda, and so she moved out, took their 4 offspring, and filed for full custody. But again, no charges were pressed against him. However, his abusive backstory with his wife is not the reason for the infamous reason you can't see this house. It's because shortly after their divorce, between the years of 2002 to 2004, Ariel kidnapped 3 young women and held them captive in this house until 2013. His victims, Amanda Berry, Michelle Knight, and Gina DeJesus, were starved, beaten, and endured unspeakable psychological and physical acts at this monster's hands, until finally in 2013 when Amanda noticed a door was left unlocked and saw a neighbor walking down the street. Amanda screamed for help and the neighbor ran to the house, broke through the door, allowing Amanda to make a valiant escape with her 6-year-old daughter. She promptly called 911 and authorities arrived in minutes, saving the other 2 victims. The case made international headlines and Ariel Castro was rightfully sentenced to life in prison plus 1,000 years without possibility of parole. As part of the plea bargain, the house was actually demolished, but still the story was so evil that it remains blurred on Google Maps forever. Starting us off here at #10 is Kusovnikov House. Back in the 19th century, this house in central Moscow was owned by a very rich couple, Peter and Sofia Kusovnikov. As legend has it, the couple were as greedy as they were rich, and so they routinely skimped on almost everything, particularly how much they paid their staff. On top of that, they were also incredibly paranoid that their fortune would be stolen from them, and so they began hiding away money in different places so that their servants couldn't steal it away from them. Now maybe if they just paid their servants properly, they might not have been so paranoid about them stealing their money, but hey, that's just me. Apparently one of these hiding spots was inside the fireplace, and I honestly don't know how they thought this would turn out, but one day, without knowing what was inside of course, one of the staff members lit a fire and accidentally burned away all the hidden cash. It's said that Sofia was so distraught over the loss that she died of a heart attack, and her husband passed away shortly after. Since then, it appears their ghosts never got over the loss of their fortune and remain haunting the house to this day. According to visitors, the ghost of a hunched over old man in a coat has routinely appeared wandering the street and frightening off any that dare step close to his house. Some even say that you can hear the couple crying at night, mourning the loss of their fortune. Coming in at #9 is St. Michael's Castle. Said to be home to the city's most famous ghost in all of Russia, if I were you, I would think twice before visiting this castle. The ghost in question that is said to haunt the halls is none other than the Tsar Paul I, the only child of Catherine the Great, and the man responsible for the construction of this very castle, who once upon a time found refuge within its very walls. However, the solace was short-lived. You see, Tsar Paul was not particularly well liked by the Russian nobility for a multitude of reasons, and so mere weeks after the castle was finished construction, a mob of his own drunken soldiers, with the blessing of his son Alexander, who, to be fair, had only instructed them to arrest him, decided against Alexander's method and instead invaded the emperor's bedroom. Once they were inside, they went ahead and brutally after he refused to abdicate the throne. According to legend, there is a particular window in the castle where he can be seen playing the violin, but whatever you do, don't disrupt him. You never know how he may react to another invasion. Coming in at number 8, Igumnov House. While today this building serves as the residence of the French ambassador, it has quite the haunted and mysterious past. During the late 19th century, it was built at the request of industrialist Nikolai Igumnov. As the story goes, Nikolai had constructed the mansion to live with his mistress, a young dancer whom he was madly in love with. But once settled in, he caught her with another man and kicked her out of the house. What's strange though is that no one ever saw the girl again. While no one knows for sure exactly what happened to her, there is a dark legend that says Nikolai was so outraged by her betrayal that he bricked her up inside the wall and left her to rot and die. And if that wasn't creepy enough, there are many stories from Soviet times where people often saw the ghost of a young woman walking through the walls of this very mansion. By 1938, it was given over to the French embassy, and people would still report the ghost of a white woman wandering the halls. I'm just saying, hell hath no fury and all, so beware if you do decide to get close, you never know what could happen. Coming in at number 7, Griboyedov Canal. Well, during the day this canal offers a beautiful view and a lovely walk along St. Petersburg. It's well known by locals that you should never dare visit it after the sun goes down. Legend has it that the famous revolutionary Sofia Perovskaya, who was responsible for the assassination of Tsar Alexander II, was by this very canal for the deed. Many believe she remains haunting the canal at night, and some even claim to have witnessed her apparitions firsthand. But beware, this one ghost even enthusiasts should stay away from. It's said that to meet her along the canal is extremely bad luck, a bad omen even. Legend has it that the life of anyone who bears witness to her shadowy figure is at risk. So if I were you, I would stick to the sunlight, otherwise you might never see the light of day again.
Number 6. The Buxton Inn. The Buxton Inn was built by Orrin Granger in 1812 as an inn and tavern, and it also served as Granville's first post office and as a stagecoach stop. I'm just gonna say it, this place is haunted. The first ghost spotted in the Buxton Inn was the first owner, Orrin. Other ghosts include the Lady in Blue, rumored to be the former innkeeper Ethel Bonnie Bonnell, Major Buxton, whom the inn was named, and even a phantom cat seen slinking along the halls. There's been strange activity like footsteps and doors opening on their own reported in the inn's basement, where stagecoach drivers would often stay during their stopovers in the past. However, the ghosts just don't stay in the basement, oh no. Rooms 7 and 9 are said to be the strongest places for activity, with apparitions appearing. One guest even reported a ghost cat showing up to cuddle and purr in the middle of the night, which, like, aw, that's so cute. Guests have reported strange phenomenon throughout the hotel though, like their names being called out and invisible footsteps. I would not want to sleep there. Number 5. Woods surrounding London. Okay, again, not London, England, but London, Ohio. Deep inside these woods sits an old abandoned barn that is so rotted away it is practically melded back into the trees. It's rumored that ghosts like to spend some time here. If you ask anyone from the area, they'll tell you that these woods are haunted. According to legend, a family of 5 was traveling through the woods in the late 1890s when they were stopped and had their lives ended by a band of thieves. Those brave enough to wander through the woods of London at night have reported hearing gunshots and disembodied screaming. Others have felt a sudden drop in temperature before seeing a strange white mist hanging in the trees. Let me just say, it's a no from me. Number 4. Ridge's Asylum. Ridge's Asylum originally opened in 1874 and was known as the Athens Asylum for the Insane. It had 2 wings, one for female patients and one for the male patients. The most violent patients were housed at the outermost tip of each wing. By the start of the 1900s, the asylum had become dangerously overcrowded, and rumors of inhumane treatment at the hands of the overworked staff were growing. Despite this, it was not officially closed until 1993. Some parts of the building are still in use, while other areas are completely abandoned. One of the scariest places in the building is the outline of a body where Margaret Shrilling died in 1979. She apparently got lost in the disused part of the hospital in the winter of 1978-79 and was not found for more than a month. When the corpse was eventually removed, it left a stain that could never be washed away, which just makes me gag thinking about it, but imagine the smell, like, ew. Ugh. She is one of the many ghosts who is said to walk the asylum at night. Strange figures have been seen roaming around the old floors. Others have heard disembodied voices, footsteps, and screaming. Most appealing to imagination is the basement. Some claim severely disabled patients were kept on chains in dungeon-like places. Some say they've even heard the chains being pulled. Oh, and there's also a cemetery on the grounds which holds over 1,930 bodies. Of those, 700 women and 959 men lay under the headstones marked with only a number, which is sad. Number 3. Bobby Mackey's. Built in 1850, Bobby Mackey's is said to be the most haunted nightclub in America. When it was first built, the building served as a slaughterhouse and meat packing facility. The standard for most slaughterhouses of its day, the facility featured a well to collect the runoff of animal blood, innards, and other waste. If that image wasn't icky enough, there have also been several deaths in and around the club throughout the years. The place harbors energy so dark that a portal to hell is rumored to swirl somewhere within its basement. There is strange, suffocating heat, a trash can once flew through the air, and the apparition of a man with a handlebar mustache appears in the mirror. I would not want to get anywhere near that place ever. Number 2. Licking County Jail. Originally opened in 1889, the Licking County Jail is now home to only prisoners serving afterlife sentences. It contains stacks of cramped, grimy cells lining its dimly lit halls. Since being put out of commission, the jail has become a notoriously haunted hotspot. While it was operating, a total of 3 sheriffs and 19 inmates died on the premise. If you make your way to Licking County Jail, it's said you should peer between the cell bars as figures of prisoners are said to peer back. Visitors have reported hearing cell doors slamming, being touched, whispering in your ear, whistles, the sound of footsteps, some of those being what seems residual, the jingling of keys, screams, and moaning, as well as seeing strange light anomalies, full shadow figures, and photos with unexpected images in them. That sounds absolutely terrifying, and I would not want to go there. And coming in at number 1 is Sedamsville Rectory. The Sedamsville Rectory is a historical building that once served as the home for priests of Our Lady of Perpetual Help Church. Priests of questionable moral character were rumored to live here, if you know what I mean, including a man who was moved around considerably before retiring from the priesthood, leaving some to believe the church was covering up his tendency of mistreating animals. His fellow priests later confessed to hearing strange sounds coming from his bedroom and feeling uneasy in his presence. As the alleged site of the mistreatment, it's no shock that the place has some wicked demonic energy. Reports detail strange howling cries and deep scratches appearing in the flesh of workers. The current owner of the building, Terry Scott, even claimed that she was pushed by an invisible force. The presence was so evil that a priest was called in to perform an exorcism, but his efforts did little to keep the demonic energy at bay, and whatever monster lurked in there still remains, and I would not want to mess with it.
Starting off this countdown, we have the Stairway to Heaven. The Stairway to Heaven, or the Haiku Stairs, is a very steep hiking trail that was closed in 1987. It was closed because of lack of maintenance of the trail, and it was deemed unsafe. It's considered one of Hawaii's most dangerous trails, but that didn't stop 18-year-old Dalen Pua from hiking out there. On February 27, 2015, Dalen went out for a hike. He had previously told his grandmother, who he was visiting, that he wanted to do so, but she warned him against it. Also, you can get charged if you do trespass, but that didn't deter Dalen. On that day, he told his grandma he was going out for a hike, but she didn't think he would dare to go there. She was wrong. The last time anyone saw him was around 11 a.m. when he sent a photo to his family of him at that location. He never returned home. Of course, there are a number of theories as to what happened to him. Maybe he fell while on the hike, since the area is dangerous. But then again, his body or bones were never found. Another theory is that he was kidnapped or killed by someone. In the photo he sent to his family, it said you can see a man lurking in the foliage. Was this his killer?
Sadly, we might never solve this case. Coming in at number 9, we have Snake Island. With a name like that, who would even want to visit it? And as you probably guessed, it is covered in snakes. This island is apparently home to around 4,000 snakes, most of them being golden lancehead vipers, aka one of the deadliest serpents in the world. It's said that this type of viper can grow up to 18 inches long, and it's so poisonous that one bite can kill you within an hour. As a result, the Brazilian government has banned anyone from ever going there. If you do, well, chances are you won't make it back alive. Legend goes that a fisherman arrived at the island in search of bananas, but was found days later in his boat, dead in a pool of his own blood. Then from 1909 to the 1920s, a family lived on the island to run the lighthouse. But according to another legend, the entire family was found dead after a group of snakes came into their home and attacked them. So like I said before, you don't ever want to go to this island. Moving on to number 8, we have Area 51. Of course this had to be on the list. Area 51 is a top secret government facility that is illegal for the public to visit. Anyone that does try to trespass can be charged, arrested, or even shot to death. This is what happened to a man in 2019. On January 28th, the man attempted to get into Area 51. He was then chased down by some cars for 8 miles. When he got out of his car, he was shot dead. Another case would be the 2 YouTubers that were arrested in September of 2019 after they tried to sneak into Area 51 and were caught recording the premise. I know we all want to know what really goes on in there, like if they got aliens or whatnot, but curiosity killed the cat. Just saying. In our 7th spot, we have the Devil's Hole. With a name like that, maybe it's best you don't visit it. So the Devil's Hole is located in a national wildlife refuge in Nevada. You can tour the area, but access to the Devil's Hole itself is off limits. They have a sign and a fence guarding the area, and the sign reads as so: "Due to the scientific importance of this area and its fragile nature, unauthorized entry is prohibited." Yes, they want to protect the ecosystem, but also it is so dangerous to enter there. So Devil's Hole is like a little hole of water. When you dive in, it's filled with complex underwater caverns. Back in 1965, one night a group of 4 friends decided to hop the fence and explore the Devil's Hole. It was Paul, David, Bill, and Jack. Jack was on the lookout while the 3 dove in, but Paul never resurfaced. As a result, David and Bill both went back under to look for him, but then David never resurfaced. To this day, their bodies have never been found.
Coming in at number 6, House on the Embankment. Among one of the most famous buildings in Russia, similar to when it was built, this apartment houses high society writers, artists, actors, and athletes alike. However, don't be fooled, it's also got a dark history that will send shivers down your spine. Between 1936 to 1938, Russia faced what is now referred to as the Great Purge. This movement was spearheaded by dictator Joseph Stalin and was essentially meant to solidify his power as leader while simultaneously removing any remaining influence from his rival Leon Trotsky. There's a lot more to it, but the bullet points pretty much boil down to the fact that Stalin was becoming increasingly paranoid of being and so he authorized the NKVD, which were like the secret police of the USSR, to abolish opposing government officials and members of the Red Army. This, however, morphed into targeting ethnic minorities and was soon no more than mass executions that they would threaten civilians with should they disobey. During these dark times, the inhabitants of the House of Embankment were uniquely targeted, having had the highest rate of per capita arrests and executions of any other residential building in Moscow. Today, it's believed that all of the ghosts of these victims have never left and remain haunting the property. Those that live there report hearing the sounds of screaming late at night, or some have even seen a dark shadow stroll down the hallway alone. And while their ghosts might not be evil, the sheer amount of ghosts will definitely scare anyone with a pulse. Coming in at number 5, St. Petersburg Rotunda. Built near the end of the 18th century, this round building didn't earn its haunting cult status until some 200 years later in the 1970s and 80s. At first, it was just a gathering place for young rockers and punks who would often cover it in graffiti, but soon enough, strange stories began popping up about this seemingly innocuous building, and soon locals began to fear what was inside. First of all, legend has it that back in in the day, the rotunda was used as a meeting point for the secretive Freemasonry. At the time, it was pretty standard belief that those involved with the low-profile group were Satan worshippers, and so the rumors of it being haunted by the devil himself began to spread like wildfire. It's said that while it is totally safe to drop in during the day, at night it's a whole other story. And whatever you do, don't you dare go down into the basement alone. Legend has it that once a man accidentally found himself in the secret Freemason temple in the basement and found himself in a parallel world for 15 minutes. When he finally got back into our realm, he was an old man, and locals believe that anyone who risks going down there will face the same fate. Not to mention, it said Satan himself will appear at the stroke of midnight and bring you down to hell should you see him. So, if I were you, I would find a different place to visit for your nightlife. Coming in at number 4, Peter and Paul Fortress. In the heart of the city of St. Petersburg lies the notorious Peter and Paul Fortress. From the time of its construction in the early 1700s all the way until the early 1920s, the fortress mainly served as a prison for political criminals. Prisoners of the fortress were said to be kept in horrible conditions, forced into overcrowded dungeons, and often tortured and malnourished, and although it has been a museum since 1924, the ghosts that died in the prison dungeon have never left. Ghosts of prisoners such as the 5 Decemberists, a group of radicals who attempted to take down the emperor, and the son of Peter the Great, who was tried and found guilty of treason, are said to haunt the halls looking for revenge on their lives. But none is more frightening than the ghost of Princess Tarakanova, a pretender to the Russian throne who was captured and brought to the fortress for her lies of who she claimed to be. 2 theories surround her death, one being that she died of tuberculosis and was buried, the other that she was drowned while in her cell. But either way, those that visit the museum today claim to hear her blood-curdling screams coming from the dungeon below. Coming in at number 3, Nizhny Novgorod Kremlin. Located in the city of Nizhny Novgorod lies a terrifying Kremlin, or fortress, with an even more terrifying backstory. As legend has it, when the fortress was being constructed, the workers kept having difficulty with one of the towers. No matter what they did, it seemed that it kept falling down, and it was putting a big halt on production as they were not able to move on until they could get it to stay standing. Now, why the tower wouldn't stay standing in the first place, I have no idea, but their solution to the problem is where the story gets especially chilling. The men decided that the best way to ensure that the tower stayed standing was to make a sacrifice and build the tower on the blood of the first person who passed by them. Allegedly, the first person who walked past happened to be a pregnant woman hurrying over to the river for some water, but sadly she never made it past the men. It said they seized her and continued on with their cruel plan, breaking her up inside the tower while she was still alive. Ever since that day, the ghost of a pale woman is seen wandering the fortress, seeking revenge on the men who took her life. Coming in at number 2, Obvodny Canal. Officially the longest artificial canal in St. Petersburg, the Obvodny Canal once served as the southern border to the city. While today it no longer serves such a purpose, it's still a huge landmark, but not necessarily for a good reason. Tragically, despite not being very deep, this location happens to be a place where many have taken their own lives. The phenomenon began as far back as construction, when workers who were digging the grounds for the canal would routinely complain of debilitating headaches or suddenly become ill with previously non-existent health conditions. Workers even began turning violent towards each other seemingly out of nowhere, but still they were ordered to finish construction no matter what. Then in the 1920s, granite tombs were discovered when the government began building a road beside the canal. Archaeologists were not permitted to study these mysterious tombs. Instead, they were destroyed and construction continued. By 1923, the rate at which people were dying in the canal began to skyrocket, and it became common knowledge to stay away. The few that have been saved from jumping in say that they had no intention to take their own lives prior to walking past the canal, and said an invisible force pushed them to do it. Others say they looked down from the bridge to see the corpse of a woman in white floating face up just beneath the surface, but as soon as they tried to call for help, she would disappear without a trace. To this day, people are warned to never stare into the murky waters in fear that whatever evil spirit lies below will bring them them down with them. And last up today in our number 1 spot, Rasputin's apartment. Arguably one of the most well-known people from Russian history is the notorious Grigory Rasputin. What made him particularly interesting to many was his mysterious and mystical nature. Born into a peasant family, Rasputin managed to work his way into fame and power by becoming the faith healer for Russia's last emperor, Tsar Nicholas. But despite being loved by the emperor, not everyone in Russia was a big fan at the time. There was a lot of controversy surrounding Rasputin and his reputation, and many believed him to be a false prophet and potentially even an antichrist. But the most famous part of Rasputin's life is his death. And if you have never heard it before, buckle up. After a previous failed at the hands of a peasant woman that required surgery, Rasputin was once again targeted. However, this time it was a group of nobles who felt Rasputin's proximity and influence to the Tsar threatened the empire. As the legend goes, Rasputin left his apartment at midnight and headed over to Prince Felix Yusupov's quarters by invitation. The prince then attempted to poison him with cyanide-filled treats, but to the prince's shock, he wasn't being affected. Next, he asked for wine, which was also allegedly poisoned, and even after 3 glasses, the man remained standing. The prince then went upstairs to consolidate with his conspirators, and they decided to shoot him, with which he swiftly shot a bullet through his chest. The other 2 conspirators then drove to the apartment to make it appear as though he got home safe to his neighbors, and the prince went downstairs to check that the bullet had done its job. Suddenly, Rasputin leaped up at the prince and attacked him and chased him into the courtyard. In the courtyard, he was shot twice more, and he collapsed before he was wrapped in cloth and dropped into the river. It's said his ghost still haunts his old apartment, scaring modern inhabitants, with many claiming to have witnessed his shadowy figure lurk in the corner watching them. I'm just saying, this is one I do not want to mess with.
Coming in at number 10 is the secret crematorium. In 1987, it was discovered that a ceramic place was secretly used as a crematorium, which is illegal, by the way. How was it discovered? Well, a man called in to complain about the smell and said, "Don't tell me they're not burning bodies. I was at the ovens in Auschwitz." Yep, he survived being in a concentration camp and recognized the smell, which I can't even begin to imagine how traumatizing that would be. The firm Oscar Ceramics belonged to David Sconsi, who owned the Pasadena crematorium, which closed after its roof was destroyed by fire. Oscar Ceramics was then closed by Hesperia Fire District officials after neighbors in the area complained of a putrid odor coming from the building. Inside, officials found 2 kilns that contained partially burned human remains, according to Assistant Fire Chief Will Wentworth. They weren't totally cremated when we shut the kilns down and opened them up. The State Attorney General office was investigating it, claiming the ceramics place has done nothing but cremate corpses, including 950 pounds of unidentified body parts from the August 31st Creditos air disaster since it opened. Yeah, that is horrifying. Number 9. Visitor in the attic. In 2012, a single mother of 5 named Tracy found a man living in her attic. She heard banging in her attic and thought it was an animal, but when she sent her older sons and nephew to check, they found a man that she had broken up with 12 years ago sleeping in her heating unit at her home in Rock Hill, Charlotte. Tracy said his addiction to drugs and offenses for robbery, including her own truck, meant that she was not interested in him, resulting in her breaking up with him a good 12 years ago. Talking about the night she discovered the man in her house, she said she had a feeling something wasn't right. Then she said she heard a thump coming from the ceiling and noticed things coming loose from the ceiling. She said, "Then all the nails just popped out of the ceiling over my bed like bing bing bing. I thought there was some poltergeist stuff going on." That's when she sent the men in her home to check out the attic. They found a man. He had packed all the old coats and jackets into the heating unit and was sleeping in the heating unit, she said, adding that the man ran downstairs and out of the house before police could get there. Officers said they found a number of sonic cups filled with feces and urine in the attic. Now, the only entrance to the attic is inside the home in the hall that connects her sons and daughter's bedrooms. Yeah, if I found out that someone was living in my attic, I would freak out. I think I'd prefer it to be a ghost. Number 8. Body in freezer. In 2015, a crew from the 36th District Court went inside Michelle Blair's apartment and began taking out the furniture when they found bodies in her deep freezer. Located in the living room, the freezer contained the bodies of her daughter and one of her sons. On being questioned of the crime, she said that they were turning into demons, so she decided to end their lives and that she would do it again. During the trial, she had many outbursts yelling "F you," and everybody wanted to know, yes, I ended her life, when speaking about her daughter. While she was in court, Michelle said, "I don't care what anybody thinks, she had to go, period." Michelle was convicted of first-degree homicide and sentenced to life imprisonment in June 2015. Currently, she is serving her sentence at the Huron Valley Correctional Facility in Pittsfield Township, Michigan. Now, as per reports, Michelle has accumulated around 28 misconducts by March 2017. Because of her conduct, she was then sentenced to an additional 38 months to 5 years. Number 7. Restaurant front. In 2019, 5 people were under arrest in connection with a ring run out of the back of the original Nancy's Seafood and Oriental Market in Savannah, Georgia. According to law enforcement, the more was 4 pounds of a certain green plant you can smoke, 100 THC vape pens, a crystal substance, and cash. All of it was served up from the inside, shocking other business owners. Not something we'd expect, said Edwin Smith, owner of Crossroads Pawn and Sales. His store is right across the street from Nancy's. He said he didn't know drug sales, but he did know that the food was very popular. Now, the investigation into what was going on behind the counter started in Bullitt County, where law enforcement thought drugs were coming from Chatham County. The trail led right to the restaurant. In some cases, people were going to the very back of the restaurant, so the general public was not made aware, said Gene Harley, assistant director of Chatham-Savannah Counter Narcotics team. He says the investigation started and ended in a few days. The owner and family members were arrested, taking down a major part in a cross-country drug ring. There were lots of people who were utilizing that solely to obtain their narcotics, so it was a distribution hub, Harley said. While this eye looks like it may belong to a scary monster, it's actually a human eye. While rummaging through photographs that captured the devastating impact of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki, this photo emerged. On the 6th and 9th of August 1945, the United States detonated 2 atomic the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, respectively. The aerial bombings together ended the lives between 129,000 and 226,000 people. People, most of whom were civilians. When the bomb detonated at 1,900 feet above the city center of Hiroshima, the subsequent explosion caused temperatures of 10,000 degrees Fahrenheit to annihilate nearly everything within 1,600 feet of blast zone. Almost anything and anyone within a mile was destroyed. And heat were so extreme that they bleached the city's exposed surfaces, except in places where an unsuspecting person shielded the building or sidewalk or bridge from the blast with their own body in their final moments alive. Now, this is what the eye of an victim plagued by an atomic cataract looks like. While it had been a well-known fact that radiation causes cataracts in animals, the development of atomic cataracts in human beings was noted after the atomic in Japan. Now, it wasn't just this person who suffered from this, but many others as well. Number 5. The Babushka Lady. The woman in the brown coat, or the Babushka Lady as she was later called by the FBI, was very close to JFK when he was assassinated in Dallas. Traveling in a presidential motorcade through downtown Dallas, JFK was assassinated, hit once in the back and once in the head. Kennedy was taken to Parkland Hospital for emergency medical treatment, where he was pronounced dead 30 minutes later. Now, Lee Harvey Oswald was charged with Kennedy's assassination. He denied. Oswald then was as well soon after. These theories allege the involvement of the CIA, the Mafia, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, the KGB, or some combination. Now, according to eyewitnesses though, this woman, the Babushka Lady, filmed the entire thing. It's thought that from her vantage point, she may have been able to answer some critical questions about what really happened that day. However, the FBI was never able to track her down, and no one has since been able to figure out the identity of this mystery observer. Number 4. human zoos. Yes, you might have thought that zoos were strictly for animals, but once upon a time there were human zoos, which I personally find disgusting. Now this photo was taken in 1904, where the US government imported 1,300 indigenous Filipinos from different tribes to display at the St. Louis Exposition in 1904. Yeah, you heard that right. The government did this, but are we really that surprised? The zoos were public displays of people, usually in so-called natural or primitive state, to be seen and gawked at. These zoos were most prominent during the 19th and 20th centuries, and in the 1870s, exhibitions of so-called exotic populations became popular throughout the Western world. Human zoos could be seen in many of Europe's largest cities, such as Paris, Hamburg, London, Milan, as well as American cities such as New York City and Chicago. These people were zoo attractions among the monkeys and lizards to show off the new US possessions. These people were often bound by ropes and visitors threw peanuts at them. The treatment of these human beings was just awful. Number 3. The Dyatlov Pass Incident. The Dyatlov Pass incident was an event in which 9 Soviet hikers died in the northern Ural Mountains between February 1st and 2nd, 1959, under uncertain circumstances. This creepy photo shows the determined group traversing the harsh terrain just before they met their fate on the night of February 1st. The experienced trekking group from the Ural Polytechnical Institute, led by Igor Dyatlov, had established a camp in the Russian SFSR of the Soviet Union. Now overnight, something caused them to cut their way out of their tent and flee the campsite while inadequately dressed for the heavy snowfall and sub-zero temperatures. Now after the group's bodies were discovered, an investigation by Soviet authorities determined that 6 of them had died from hypothermia, while the other 3 had died by physical trauma. One victim had major skull damage, 2 had severe chest trauma, and another had a small crack in his skull. 4 of the bodies were found lying in running water in a creek, and 3 of those 4 had damaged soft tissue of the head and face. 2 of the bodies had missing eyes, 1 had a missing tongue, and 1 had missing eyebrows. Number 2. Treatment of a patient with mental illness. This 1890 photo depicts a woman forced into a crucifixion pose and facing a wall. The woman is a patient at a mental institution undergoing treatment. Now believe it or not, forced standing was considered a legitimate part of treatment for mental illness in 19th century Germany. Now back in the 18th and early 20th century, women were sometimes institutionalized due to their opinions and their inability to be controlled properly by a primarily male-dominated culture. There were financial incentives too, because before the passage of the Married Women's Property Act 1882, all of a wife's assets passed automatically to her husband. The men who were in charge of these women, either a husband, father, or brother, could send these women to mental institutions, stating they believed that these women were mentally ill because of their strong opinions. These men had the last say when it came to the mental health of these women, so if they believed that these women were mentally ill, or if they simply wanted to silence the voices and opinions of these women, they could easily send them to mental institutions. This is what could have happened to this woman in that photograph. Now besides standing, practices at these asylums were dark, as they had treatments that included restraints, isolation, electroshock therapy, ice baths, forced drugging, and even lobotomies. And coming in at number 1 is mustard gas tested on American military. Mustard gas is a type of chemical warfare agent, and as a chemical weapon, mustard gas was first used in World War I. In 1943, the US Navy exposed its own sailors to mustard gas. Now officially, the Navy was testing the effectiveness of new clothing and gas masks against the deadly gas that had proven so terrifying in the First World War. Young men were approached after 8 weeks of boot camp and asked if they wanted to participate in an experiment that would help shorten the war. Obviously they said yes, but they didn't know what they were signing up for. Only when the boys reached the research laboratory were they told the experiment involved mustard gas. Now the participants, almost all of whom suffered several external and internal burns, were ignored by the Navy and in some cases were threatened with the Espionage Act. In 1991, the reports were finally declassified and taken before Congress.
Starting us off at number 10, Sandy Island. Also known as the Phantom Island, this peculiar location was first discovered by the famous British explorer Captain James Cook in 1774. Now, what's crazy about Sandy Island is that it was documented on maps, globes, and even nautical charts for 238 years. But now if you go to Google Maps, you will see no such island. The reason being is that in 1979, it was quite literally undiscovered, as apparently no landmass existed there. But even so, it remained on Google Maps until 2012. This seemingly conflicting information made many wonder if there is something that we aren't being told about the strange island. Or non-island, I suppose. And so naturally, a conspiracy theory began, stating that this undiscovered island actually was there and that we are being lied to. Now, I'm not about to jump quite to that conclusion, however, I will admit that it isn't every day that something becomes undiscovered, so it does make sense to wonder if there is something going on behind the scenes. However, I guess we will never know for sure. Next up at number 9, Blurred House. So, I'll be honest, I'm not entirely sure if this qualifies as terrifying in the usual sense. However, it is certainly mysterious, and so I couldn't help myself from adding it to today's list. Located in Stockton-on-Tees, England, there is an inexplicable blurring of a random house that has perplexed neighbors, tourists, and even the residents themselves since 2009. Of course, when things like this happen, people like to make their own conclusions, and so rumors involving crime or aliens began spreading about the property. But in reality, the truth was much more unnerving, that no one could actually explain or figure out why it was banned for public viewing. In fact, according to the current resident, quote, "I've been in this house since 2000, but I have no idea why you can't see it." Which would mean at one point you could see it, and then 9 years later it was suddenly not suitable for the public to have access to? So, is there something spooky about this house that Google doesn't want us to know? Certainly seems that way. Coming in at number 8, Baker Lake. Up in a remote location of Nunavut, Canada, there is a seemingly innocuous place called Baker Lake that for some mysterious reason is not fully visible on Google Maps. In fact, if you do a quick search, there is actually a long black strip that covers a good chunk of the area, and as I'm sure you can imagine, it has garnered a terrifying conspiracy theory to explain why that is. The theory states that this black strip is actually covering extraterrestrial beacons that the government secretly brought down to Earth in 1972. The theory then goes on to explain that these top secret beacons exert powerful electromagnetic fields that disrupt Earth's natural energy grids, which in turn have altered the weather and have been used to focus the Earth's energy in undisclosed ways. Further, there are some out there who propose that because these alleged beacons are stolen space property, it has caused a massive war with aliens, hence the uprising in alleged UFO sightings. Now, in reality, we have no concrete evidence as to why this is blurred out, but whatever it is, it must be for a good reason. Next up at number 7, Jeannette Island. Located somewhere in the East Siberian Sea, this mysterious tiny island measures just 1.2 miles in length, and according to the powers that be, we are not supposed to know about it. First discovered in the late 19th century during the Jeannette expedition, this icy landmass and the ominous Google Maps blob that covers it have been the subject of numerous conspiracies, ranging from the usual alien stuff to it being a top secret government base for secret or evil deals amongst world leaders. Now, one thing we do know about this place is that there have been some issues over the years about who the island legally belonged to, with the US and Russia often butting heads over ownership. This has, of course, lended its hand to the evil political military base narrative, but for all we know, the truth could be even more terrifying.
Moving on to number 6, we have Ramree Island. Tourists are banned from ever visiting this island, because chances are your vacation will take a deadly turn if you decide to go there. This island is home to thousands of saltwater crocodiles, and they weigh around 2,000 pounds. Even the small ones pose a threat to humans. They have the capability of killing someone twice their size. On top of that, they are highly aggressive and will attack anyone that enters their habitat. In fact, the most number of fatalities in a crocodile attack took place at Ramree Island. In 1945, British soldiers drove the Japanese fighters off the main area of the island, forcing them to flee into the marshy area surrounding the island. One problem: those marshes were filled with hungry crocodiles. As a result, 500 soldiers were killed by these crocodiles. So yeah, maybe don't go to this island unless you want to be crocodile dinner. And of course, there's a number of stories of tourists going to this island and then being attacked and killed by these beasts. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Bouvet Island. Now here's the thing with Bouvet Island. You can visit it, but it would be a death wish if you did. Bouvet Island is extremely isolated and is almost completely covered by a glacier. Its nearest inhabited land is 1,600 miles away. One way to get there is by boat, but it would take very long and you would be facing extreme weather conditions while doing so. As a result, most expeditions are done by helicopter. Even then, if the weather suddenly changes, you're basically screwed because the island is so remote and far away from other pieces of land. But in 1964, a lifeboat was found abandoned at this island. How did it get there? How could this little boat survive crossing the Southern Ocean? It's a mystery that still baffles many. But also, where did the passengers of the boat go, if they had any? We got no clue, just a couple of theories. And at number 4 we have Vortex Spring. Vortex Spring is known for having pretty complex diving caves, but only those that have a diving certificate or are accompanied by an experienced diver can go there by themselves. In the 1980s, 13 people died in the vortex. There's one area in the underwater caves that are considered so deadly that it's blocked off, and people are prohibited from entering there. It's got this creepy warning sign with the Grim Reaper, and it's often locked with a gate. It's just far too easy for people to get lost and drown in there. But that didn't stop Ben McDaniel. On August 18, 2010, Ben was seen entering the water near the caves and was never seen again. This case is quite strange, like there's a lot of pieces to it. Some say he faked his death because he owed the IRS a lot of money, and also he had a failed marriage, so maybe this was his way of starting over. Or Ben really did get lost in the caves and drowned, but his gear or body have never been found. In our 3rd spot, we have the Bolton Strid. The Strid near Bolton Abbey is said to be the most dangerous stretch of water in the world. Just by looking at it, you wouldn't even think it's dangerous. I mean, the current isn't even that fast. But below the water surface are strong undercurrents that will toss you back and forth against the sharp, jagged rocks until you die. It's also fairly deep and it could just suck you down until you drown. In fact, it has a 100% fatality rate. Everyone that has gone or fallen in have never made it out alive. Their bodies also have never been found. There are a number of stories of people trying to leap across the river only to slip and fall in. In one case, there was a newlywed couple visiting the Strid. However, upon trying to cross the Strid, the bride fell in, and the groom fell in also trying to save her. As a result, there are a number of warning signs all around the area trying to warn people of the Strid's dangers. But of course, a lot of people ignore the signs since the Strid is so deceiving and looks pretty safe. In our 2nd spot, we have North Sentinel Island. The reason why you can't visit this island is because it is home to a tribe that will kill anyone who dares to intrude on their land. They live their own life completely isolated from the rest of the world. In fact, they still live a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. But a man named John Allen believed that with the power of God, he would be able to convert them to Christianity and help them. He believed that this island was Satan's last stronghold on Earth. So in November of 2018, he headed out to the island. Now, the people that took him there knew of the dangers and really didn't want to, but he was so insistent that they finally gave in. In fact, they were later arrested for doing so. John's first attempt at making contact with them didn't go as planned. As soon as he stepped foot on the island, several men came charging at him, firing arrows. So he fled. But on November 16th, he tried again. He got a fisherman to drop him off alone, and that was the last time anyone had ever seen him. When people went back there for him, they saw the tribe members dragging his dead body with a rope. And in our number 1 spot, we have the Secret Cave. It was the evening of August 17th, 2005, and 5 friends were having dinner together. They were Scott McDonald, J. Blake Donner, Jennifer Lynn Galbraith, Ariel Singer, and Stephen Hunley. While eating, the group got to talking about this secret cave, which was a legend where they were from. It's all about this cool secret cave / hangout spot. Rumor has it that's where human sacrifices were made, etc. But of course, no one thought it was a a real cave. That's when Jennifer said that it was real and that she had been there before. The friends, not really believing her, asked her to bring them there. And so they did. So basically, up in the mountains by Brigham Young University, there was this small opening to a cave. The entrance was in the shape of a Y. But in order to get to the secret hangout spot, Jennifer told them they would have to dive down one area through this underwater tunnel to the other side, where there was an air pocket. The tunnel was 15 feet, and the gap they would have to swim through was 20 inches wide. So it was just enough for people to squeeze through. On top of that, someone had put a rope in the water so you could just pull yourself underwater with. So that's what the four of the friends did. Stephen Hunley decided to stay back. He waited for the group for about an hour, then he decided to call for help. And when police arrived, they were horrified at what they saw. So it seems like the group of friends successfully managed to get to the other side, but they couldn't make it back. The police ended up pumping out the water so that they could enter. And that's when they found all four of the friends' bodies stacked up against each other. It seems as if the person leading, who was Jennifer, got stuck on the way out and then she drowned. It would then be impossible to swim over her. So then the second person that went swimming was stopped at Jen's body, and they couldn't get back out because then the third person was coming in. So everyone was just blocked in this small tunnel. Slowly but surely, all of them drowned in this small dark cave. For safety reasons, this cave is no longer accessible.
Number 10. The Bisman Building. The Bisman Building was built in 1886, and fun fact, the film Shawshank Redemption used this place as a filming location. If you have seen the film, the building is used as the entrance to the Brewer Hotel, where Brooks and Red stayed after they were paroled from Shawshank. The real building, though, is haunted. While here many people experience a feeling of dread and sadness, particularly on the third floor. Many people also report an overwhelming sensation of darkness when on this floor, so if I were you, I would just stay away from the third floor in general. Disembodied footsteps, voices, being poked and pushed, black shadows, and dark figures caught in images seems to be something that happens a lot. Spirits of a young girl, Ruthie, her aunt, and the spirit of a retired worker who died in an accident before leaving the building are three identified spirits that stay here. In past investigations here, investigators have received audible responses to their questions. Yep, the ghosts spoke to them. One piece of audio evidence was when an investigator asked if they could speak to Ruthie, and a voice was caught saying, "Is Ruthie here?" In addition to Ruthie, people have witnessed the spirit of a woman throughout the upper floors, people in Victorian clothing, and the sounds of people working. Number 9. Staley Road. Sometime in the early 1800s, pioneer John Wrench used the services of three Staley brothers to build a flour mill. The finished structure was to become the first double-wheeled mill in Ohio. The business flourished, and after several years, John had made enough money to retire and ended up selling his mill to Elias Staley. The mill was then passed down to his brother Andrew and continued to produce flour until 1905. Today, the mill is still standing, and on Staley Road, named for the brothers, winds its way past and through the woods. It has become something of a rite of passage for local teens to drive this road at night to show how brave they are. It's been said that Old Man Staley went on a rampage, ending the lives of many, and is now haunting the road. Motorists say that they often experience unexplained car trouble, and some have even seen Staley's ghost standing next to or even lying in the road. Number 8. The Golden Lamb. As the oldest hotel in Ohio, the Golden Lamb has seen more than its share of famous guests, including Charles Dickens, Mark Twain, Daniel Webster, and 12 American presidents. Yeah. 12. It's fantastic, but there's also been death and tragedy in the hotel. Guests have cited a girl who may be Sarah Stubbs, the niece of the hotel manager in the 1800s, or possibly Eliza Clay, a girl who died of a high fever at the hotel in 1825. The ghost of Charles R. Sherman, an Ohio Supreme Court justice who died at the inn in 1929, is said to appear in the hallways as a gray, gaunt man and conjures the smell of cigar smoke. Charles's death left his wife and 11 children, including Civil War General William T. Sherman, penniless. As a result, most of his children were put up for adoption, and some say the guilt of his family's demise keeps his spirit at the inn. Number 7. Moonville Tunnel. Located deep in the woods, the tunnel is framed by a faded stone archway covered in moss. The tunnel itself is long and extremely dark. It's actually an out-of-work stretch of railroad track that leads to an old coal mining shocking town. If you're brave enough to venture through it, you might see the ghost of Frank Lawhead, an unlucky train conductor who met his end in a head-on collision with another train. Visitors in the area have taken photos with cameras or phones, only to look back at them later and notice the pale figure of a man they didn't see before, or phantom train lights blazing at the end of the tunnel. It's also said if you listen carefully, inhale deeply, and blink intermittently, you may encounter spirits from another time. The piercing whistle of a train rounding a curve, the smell of lavender wafting from a woman in an old-fashioned dress, or even the glow of gaslit lantern illuminating the face of the weathered brakeman. So that's fun. Number 6. School Fight Club. A teacher in Florida has been arrested for allegedly organizing student fights in her classroom. Yep, a place where you're supposed to learn turned into a fighting ring. Angel Footman watched on from behind her desk as students of Griffin Middle School attacked each other senselessly and even asked them to not record the fight or attract attention by screaming. She has been slapped with 4 counts of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. Now, Angel has denied organizing fights but acknowledged failing to report them. But footage released of these fights showed her laying down the rules of engagement, telling participants not to pull hair and to limit their clashes to 30 seconds each, the outlet reported. Number 5. Campsite. 7.5 months after the Cowden family was reported missing in 1974, police found their bodies. The Cowdens had gone camping in the Siskiyou Mountains in Applegate, Oregon over Labor Day weekend in 1974, but failed to show up for dinner at Richard Cowan's mother's house on September 1st. The media accounts from the time described their campsite as undisturbed, as if the family left abruptly. Investigators later postulated that they had been abducted. Then, their bodies were discovered in April 1975, about 100 feet from the campsite. Richard's body was found tied to a tree, while the bodies of his wife, son, and daughter were found in a cave with rocks sealing the entrance. Dwayne Lee Little, a criminal serving 2 life sentences, allegedly confessed to a fellow inmate that he ended the lives of the Cowdens family while on parole, but there was no conviction and the case remains open. Number 4. Under the bed. Sometimes when you're young, you want your parents to check under your bed for something scary. While something evil under your bed is just an urban legend, this gruesome story actually happened to a couple from as far back as 1982. Now, there were 3 criminals in New Jersey who thought they had a good scam going. They'd steal cars and sell them, but 2 of the 3 got suspicious regarding the 3rd, Gary Smith. Now, all 3 rented a motel room in New Bergen, New Jersey and ordered some food. The 2 men laced the unwitting Gary's burger with cyanide, and after a few bites, Gary began to succumb to the poison and died. The pair then stuffed the dead man's corpse under the bed and left. It was found days later by the 4th couple who rented the room. His body was bloated and discolored after a few nights in between the mattress and the frame in a heated room. Number 3. Severed feet. British Columbia, Canada is home to one of the most gruesome and baffling discoveries within the past few decades. Since 2007, at least 16 severed human feet and running shoes have been found on its shores, from Jedediah Island to Barnacle Beach. Although some of the feet have been identified, it is still unknown why the feet were detached and how they got in the sea. The latest solved case involving a human foot was completed in 2019 for a foot discovered in 2018. In September of that year, a left foot was found inside a blue sock and light gray Nike running shoe. The shoe and foot matched information police had in a missing person report from 2018. The family of that missing person was contacted and provided samples for DNA testing, which matched the DNA samples from the foot. Now, since then, there have been other feet found, as one was found in 2021 and one was found in July of this year. Now, if I came across a severed foot on a beach, I would absolutely freak out. Number 2. Mouse in food. Health and safety is really important in the food industry, but it seems like a Subway in Lincoln City, Oregon didn't really care, as customers may have unknowingly been eating spinach tainted by a dead rodent. Yep, you heard that right. Matt Jones, who discovered the dead animal in his friend Jay's sandwich, took a photo of it. His first reaction was to laugh because he was in utter disbelief about what was in front of him, but his friend, on the other hand, was obviously revolted revolted at the sight. According to the staff of the establishment, Jay wanted some spinach on his sandwich. The employee who prepared the food scooped the last bit of spinach out of the batch and slapped it onto the sandwich. Now that scoop contained the rodent. This means that everyone who ate spinach from that batch came into contact with food contaminated by a dead animal. The state health department said that the episode didn't put anyone in danger of becoming sick, but it sure did make an impact on the business's name. Health inspectors had consulted with physicians about the circumstances and concluded that the risk of becoming sick would be very low. I would never eat there again if that happened to me. And coming at number 1 is the dolls. Anatoly Moskvin is a Russian former journalist, college professor, and self-dubbed necropolist with expert knowledge of cemeteries. Now this man was a little strange as he loved collecting dolls. He had many and the figures had resembled antique dolls. Some wore knee-high boots, others had makeup on their faces Anatoly had covered in fabric. He also had hidden their hands in fabric, except these were not dolls. They were mummified corpses of human girls. Yeah, real dead bodies. He was obsessed with digging up the dead and making dolls out of their corpses. After making his human dolls, he kept them in his home as his companions and lovers. I kissed her once, then again, Anatoly wrote about one of his dolls. Police finally caught up to him in 2011 after years of increasing suspicion at the growing number of desecrated graves in his home city. When the police arrived at his home, they found 26 life-size dolls, or rather mummified corpses, scattered throughout. When police moved one of the bodies, it played music as if on cue. Inside the chests of many of the dolls, Anatoly had embedded music boxes. Now there were also photographs and plaques taken off the gravestone, doll making manuals, and maps of local cemeteries strewn about the apartment. Now this is just overall extremely disturbing. I just can't.